Long ago, in a small village at the edge of the great forest, there lived a young woman named Blessing. She was well loved in her village for her kindness, her beauty, and her skill in weaving the finest clothes. Blessing was in love with a humble farmer named Charles, a hard-working and gentle man who also loved her with all his heart. Though they were happy together, their future seemed unclear. The village customs required that a grand wedding feast be held, with plenty of food, music, and fine clothes. But Blessing and Charles were poor. They had no wealth, no large farm, and no animals to sell. All they had was their love. And though that was enough for them, it was not enough for the village. Without a proper feast, they could not be married. One day, as Blessing sat by the river, thinking about her problem, an old woman appeared from the forest. Her skin was very dark and her eyes seemed to shine with a strange light. She wore a black robe with leaves on it. She had a soft voice, but it was powerful. "Why do you look so troubled, child?" the old woman asked, holding a staff. Blessing, who had been raised to always respect her elders, explained her predicament. "I am to marry Charles, but we have nothing. No gold, no feast, no fine cloth. How can we marry when we cannot honor the village's customs?" The old woman nodded, as if she understood. "I can help you," she said, "but in exchange, you must promise me one thing. Never speak of how you got the wealth, and never try to use it for greed." Blessing, desperate to marry the man she loved, agreed without hesitation. That night, under the cover of darkness, the old woman led Blessing deep into the great forest, further than anyone from the village had ever gone. The trees grew taller and thicker, and the air became cool and strange. At last, they came to a clearing, and in the center of the clearing stood a towering baobab tree, its trunk wide and ancient, its branches reaching high into the sky. The old woman placed her hands on the tree and whispered words in a language Blessing could not understand. Slowly, the bark of the tree split open, revealing a hidden chamber filled with treasures. There were golden coins, rich fabrics, and baskets of the finest food. The scent of sweet fruits and roasted meats filled the air, making Blessing's mouth water. "Take only what you need," the old woman said, her voice serious. "Remember your promise. Never tell anyone where this came from, and never take more than what is needed." Blessing nodded, and with trembling hands, took a small amount of gold, enough to pay for the wedding feast. She took some rich fabrics for her wedding dress and a few baskets of food. Then, as the old woman watched, the tree closed, sealing its treasures inside once again. "Thank you," Blessing whispered, but when she turned, the old woman was already gone, leaving Blessing alone in the moonlit forest. The next morning, Blessing returned to the village with her treasures. She went to the market and bought everything she needed for the wedding feast. She hired musicians, cooks, and even weavers to make her wedding gown from the fine cloth she had taken. The villagers were amazed. No one had ever seen such wealth from Blessing and Charles, but when they asked where it came from, Blessing simply smiled and said nothing. The wedding was the grandest the village had ever seen. People from neighboring villages came to celebrate. The musicians played late into the night, and the feast was so plentiful that even the poorest villagers ate until they could eat no more. Blessing and Charles were married under the bright moon, and their happiness was complete. But as time went on, rumors began to spread. Some of the villagers, curious about Blessing's sudden wealth, began to whisper among themselves. How did she come by such riches, they wondered. Is it true that she has found a secret treasure? Some said that Blessing had made a deal with the spirits of the forest, and others believed she had found gold buried by their ancestors. One of the villagers, a man named Edith, was particularly envious of Blessing's fortune. He was known for his greed and his ambition. Edith, who had always wanted wealth and power, became obsessed with discovering Blessing's secret. He watched her closely, hoping to catch her in the act of revealing her mysterious source of wealth. A year passed, and Blessing and Charles lived a happy life together. They were content with what they had. never asking for more than what they needed. But one day their child fell ill, and the local healer's medicines were not enough. Blessing, desperate to save her child, remembered the baobab tree and the treasures it held. Though she had promised the old woman not to return for more than she needed, Blessing believed that saving her child was a worthy reason. She went back into the forest, deeper and deeper, until she reached the clearing with the great baobab tree. Once again, she placed her hands on the tree and whispered the words the old woman had spoken. The tree opened, revealing its treasures once more. Blessing took only a small amount of gold, just enough to pay for the best healer in the land. She closed the tree and hurried back to the village. Her child recovered, and Blessing was grateful for the help of the mysterious baobab. But Edith, who had been watching Blessing all along, followed her into the forest. He had seen her open the tree, and now he knew her secret. Greedy for the wealth he believed was his for the taking, Edith waited until nightfall and then snuck into the forest. He came to the great baobab tree and placed his hands on the bark. But when he whispered the words he had heard Blessing say, nothing happened. The tree remained closed. Enraged, Edith began to pound on the tree, shouting and demanding that it give him its treasures. But the more he shouted, the more the forest seemed to close in around him. The wind began to howl, and the trees groaned as if they were alive. The ground beneath Edith's feet shook, and suddenly the great baobab tree began to sink into the earth, its treasures disappearing with it. Edith tried to run, but the forest seemed to trap him. The branches of the trees reached down like arms, holding him in place. The wind roared in his ears, and the ground opened beneath him. In an instant, Edith was gone, swallowed by the earth along with the great baobab. The next morning, the villagers awoke to find that Edith was missing. They searched for him, but found no trace. Some said that the spirits of the forest had taken him, and others believed that he had wandered too deep into the forest and been lost forever. Blessing, who had heard the rumors, knew in her heart what had happened. She remembered the old woman's warning and knew that Edith's greed had sealed his fate. From that day on, Blessing never returned to the baobab tree, and the old woman never appeared to her again. Blessing and Charles lived the rest of their days in peace, content with the simple life they had built. They never sought more than what they needed, and the villagers came to respect them for their wisdom and generosity. As for the baobab tree, it was never seen again, and the forest grew thick and wild where it once stood. And so the story of Blessing and the mysterious tree became a lesson passed down through the generations. The villagers learned that greed would only lead to ruin, and that sometimes the greatest treasure was not wealth, but the wisdom to know when enough is enough. Please like and subscribe to the channel for more exciting African stories.